Well, hey folks, how's it going this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are? Uh, Thanks for joining me today on this beautiful Saturday. Um, so I wanted to do this live stream because I gave this presentation in Oakridge at the Oakridge, Oregon, at the it was at the Oakridge, Oregon Sasquatch Summerfest. I think that's technically the name of the event, and it's run by Priscilla. And it's a great event. It's the second year I've been there, and this year it was even more people than before, which is a great thing. Um, but there was no screen there this year. So I had to basically, I just kind of got up there and didn't show my slides, and I just kind of winged it, as you know. Which, I mean, we can all do this. Uh, but I wanted to just do this short presentation today just to show you what the slides were that went along with it. Um, so, uh, Let me see. Where did they go? I just added them in here. Uh, so this, let's see. Uh, anyway, let's see. Who do we have today? Hey, Quarks, how's it going today? Uh, yes. The O animator from Bob Greener is really amazing. I think we're going to discover some amazing things like that. I've just started playing around with it. And for those of you who don't know, this allows you to kind of, there's a standing wave project that allows you at Bob's site, Starfire Tech / standing wave project to show how different sounds affect different materials. And it's a way to look at Chladni figures, cymatics, standing waves, and simulate different materials, different frequencies. It's very interesting to play with, and it's going to touch on what we're talking about today. Hey, Jules, how's it going? Thanks for being here. And I think we got Brooke. Hey, guys. Thanks very much. Oh, so just mention that's the intro song. So that is a song I wrote with Dava Nasser. Dava is this great guitarist, and I was playing the acoustic on that part, and she heard it and thought she could add some interesting electric guitar on top. I met Dava. This is very interesting. I met Dava at a remote viewing conference, and it was it was at the App Fest, and it was one of Marty's conferences. Marty, I departed us physically earlier this year. I gave a lot of presentations to his App Fest, and he had a separate conference from the IRVA conference, which was like the main International Remote Viewing Association. So there were some people that wanted to have another conference, including Joe McMonagle and Ed May, who were not CRV oriented. For those of you familiar with RV, taking my classes or anything like this, there are people that don't use the Ingo written technique. It's just more, and I think Joe has taught this. I'm not sure the last time he taught it. I've had people come take his RV classes at the Monroe Institute, which are non-CRV. It's like not a written system. It's just where you relax and describe what you're perceiving. It's a different way to do it. Some people call it ERV. And Marty Rosenblatt's conferences were oriented more towards getting these outcomes, doing ARV, placing bets. We held some of these in Vegas. But this particular conference, I think, was in New Orleans, and Marty would hold his right before IRVA at the same hotel, which I think is legal to do. It's not like they were competitors, but they were a different style. Marty's conferences just for those of you that are interested in this. We're oriented towards just let's sit down and do RV and let's place bets on sports teams and things. And it's mainly just to show, at least my interest in this, just to show that RV works. And so I met Dava in the elevator at New Orleans. Everything. She said, "Hey, I know you from YouTube." Okay. So Dava was also, I play acoustic guitar. I've been playing guitar longer than I've been doing anything else. So I've always been interested in sound and, the Chladni figures and how this all relates, because it's all energy and frequency, right? And vibration, as Tesla said. And so at some point, all of these types of forces, as we'll get into today, come together. Sound interacts, interrelates, shapes, and informs electromagnetic effects, which in turn shapes how energy disperses across our physical reality. In any case, I just sort of came up with that riff, and Dava put in the guitar and the special effects, and it kind of, it's like the panic and the strangeness of the Roswell event. Basically, and by the way, I did see Don Schmidt give a presentation in recently in Denver for MUFON. And, Don has, I'm just looking around because I always have Don's books around about Roswell, but he gave us another presentation. And this was very interesting, guys, because it was, since we've had these hearings in Congress recently, and in the Senate, there was a Senate event in one of those Senate buildings a couple of weeks ago. Remember that one? It was sort of like a press event. I forgot who hosted it last time. And Don gave us, now he's written these great books, Witness to Roswell and Children of Roswell. It really had a big impact because it was like, okay, let's say we had another meeting in the Senate building and we had all the Roswell witnesses come and present their case. What would they say if this was like a trial, like Roswell on trial? You kind of get the idea. And he presented the witnesses, and I have studied this, and I've heard Don talk before, and heard Stanton Friedman. But the impact of it was really strong again, because, these people were really abused by the U.S. military. They were threatened. They threatened little kids. I had just somehow forgotten that Mac Brazel, the ranch hand that found the wreckage, was imprisoned by the military, the U.S. Army, which is illegal to imprison U.S. citizens, to have anything to do with U.S. citizens on U.S. soil, for 5 days without food and water, and was even given a body cavity search. So, guys, you don't do a body cavity search on someone for weather balloon parts, okay? For rubber and balsa wood. No way. So, he was on his way to do an interview with the local radio station, right? And I visited Roswell recently. I mean, there's kind of all these connections. On the way back from the IRVA conference just last October in Cloudcroft, New Mexico, I swung by Roswell on the way back up to Boulder, Colorado, to check out the Roswell Museum there, which is a great museum that Don Schmidt has helped put together in the past, and I wanted to just check out the museum again. And so it goes through all the history, and there's just a lot of pieces of evidence from that event. And I had forgotten that Brazel was on his way he was staying at one of the radio manager's homes and had gotten a cup of coffee and was on his way to the studio to talk about this huge field of wreckage that he had found, which I think was like a mile long or something. Really big, because the ranch was just a vast ranch. And the sheep would not cross this wreckage, right? They would not cross it, and Brazil was going to do, Brazil was going to do an interview on the radio station and was interdicted by the U.S. Army and held captive for 5 days and threatened. And they did this with some of the other witnesses, Sheriff Wilcox, and they went to anyone who had a little piece, including kids, where they went to their homes and told them, your bodies are going to be found in the desert if you don't give us that wreckage. So, I mean, this is a war crime committed by the U.S. military against Roswell witnesses. Okay, and we'll just leave it at that for the moment. But it was a very strong presentation because, again, guys, just to recap before we get into the Bigfoot conference here, and I'll show you the slides, and what I wanted to show you is we've had a lot of presentations of recent witnesses to UFO events in Congress, in Senate, House of Representatives, Burchett, Burleson, Luna, those representatives who've had these events. And those are recent witnesses like Dylan Borland and Matt Brown and others who have given us this excellent testimony. Ryan Graves, recent events and Nimitz witnesses, right? But I guess a lot of us are wondering, what about all these historical events, right? You've had these discussions with your friends, right? What about all the big UFO, UAP events in history that hasn't been discussed yet? And Schmidt's point here was, we have to address these cases because we're not talking about one or two witnesses, even as important as these cases are. I interviewed the witnesses from Nimitz and Princeton. If you'll remember, go back on my YouTube channel a couple of years ago when I met them at the Laughlin International UFO Congress. It was the MegaCon in 2019 in Laughlin. And those are multiple witnesses. But Roswell, there's something like 600 witnesses, many of whom have passed over by now. What about all those cases? I mean, it's like a huge part of our history that's been suppressed, right? I think you get the idea. And it's been denied, and we haven't heard from that yet. And as important as these events are right now, to look at this phenomena, we need to recognize the historical cases. Kecksburg, 1965, that Stan Gordon introduced me to the first time I saw him at the UFO Crash Conference run by the Ryan and Bob Wood in Vegas 23 years ago or so. Phoenix Lights, 1997. The Varginha incident in Brazil, also hundreds and hundreds of witnesses from 1996, the year I learned remote viewing. So guys, just as a historical point of view, these cases really matter a lot. And what I'm suggesting to you is that there is a large hidden history in these United States of events that don't fit into our ordinary paradigm, which we have been suppressing for so many decades based on the way we do science, and we love these linear methods for doing statistics and all this. And so this is a huge topic, right? We have a hidden history of UFO events, and we're related. Varginha matters because there were U.S. planes sent from Wright-Patterson were told to pick up the wreckage and the bodies. Witnesses saw this in Virginia. You can see James Fox's newer film, recently redone, Moment of Contact, where he added new witnesses, including another person from the medical hospital, in addition to the surgeon that operated on one of these beings. who talked about what they saw. So there's a lot of credible witnesses. You know, it's like Brazil's Roswell incident. Any case, guys, this gets into a lot of different topics, and you know, it's something that I think is very important, and it relates to this topic we're going to talk about right now. Because as I said in Oakridge, now I'm just trying to find these pictures. I just uploaded. Okay, so this is how frustrating computers are. I just uploaded new pictures to show you, and they're not there in the little settings, so we're going to do this another way. Okay, hold on a second. We're going to go to my screen here. Yes, so the Oakridge conference. Let's see if I can show you. Yes, guys, so this is what we're talking about. You get to see footprints if you've never seen hydrocal casts or footprints. This is a lot of fun. I enjoy going to these conferences, folks, because you get to meet people and talk to witnesses. This is the amphitheater in Oakridge. Can you all see that? Oh, hey, Gordon. Nice to see you here. Welcome. So Gordon's someone that shows up at literally all of Bob Greenyear's, just as Corky does. I've been going to the Gordon and Corks have been going to these longer than I have since like 2022. So welcome, Gordon. And they always provide a lot of great questions and commentary during Bob's lectures. By the way, I've learned so much from the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, Bob Greenyear, and it's kind of informed my understanding of all these topics, as I'm about to show you in a moment. So in any case, it's really great going to these conferences just because you get to talk to people, folks. You get to talk to people who've had contact. Now, here's the thing. I'm speaking to you as a sociologist here. People will share stories and experiences that they don't share in public generally. You guys kind of get this, right? At a festival like this, you're around other people with similar interests, whether it's a fish conference, a concert, or if you're a Deadhead. I've been to a couple Grateful Dead concerts in Boulder, the more recent ones post Jerry. Whatever you're into when you're in a festival or a group like this, it has a very interesting atmosphere. I think you'll agree. And people sit around there or vendor booths, and this was Don Monroe's booth, who is a great researcher who goes, and he had an assistant there, and he puts up pictures of all the things he's photographed. Now, Don is a fearless explorer. I'll show you a picture of him in a moment because I met him in the Bailey, Colorado conferences a number of years ago, Bigfoot conferences. And he goes into caves and he goes to places where people don't go anymore. He follows old railroad tracks. And he made the case to me and in his presentations that some parts of the U.S. are less explored than before by a long shot, because we used to have railroads going through all sorts of areas, right? And the railroads have been taken down in many parts of the western U.S., and so those areas have less people, and that's more likely where you are to find Bigfoot and other strange creatures. And Don has lots of photos of creatures and beings he's found inside caves, artifacts he's found in very remote areas, and he brings these photos of these things. This is his booth. So it's a lot of fun talking with Don. Don always wears these really strong boots, cowboy boots, because he goes into places where there are snakes that bite. He told me one of the best places, the best Bigfoot states in the U.S. is Nebraska. Not Washington, not Oregon, Nebraska. Because there are lots of rivers that go below the cornfields there where deer go along and the Sasquatch follow the deer. And he said that's one of the best places. There are also a lot of copperhead snakes in these river canyons that go through Nebraska. You have too strong a word, canyons, rivers that go below the fields in Nebraska. So Don is a great guy to talk to. And this is when you go to these conferences, folks, you're going to these are Tobe Johnson's Bigfoot carvings. Tobe has written a book about the Owl Moon experiment in the Owl Moon Wilderness. He took me out there last year in a Cottage Grove after the previous Oakridge festival. And Tobe does these great Bigfoot carvings that you can purchase at conferences like this. He also hosts the Olympic Strange Days event, which I will be at this year again in Forks, Washington, October 1st through 4th, if I'm not mistaken. And I've been to one of these before, and it's interesting areas where there are Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings. And Tobe took me out to the Owl Moon Labs to show me. If you've watched the Flash of Beauty YouTube channel, Tobe and Alicia have been putting up videos of very interesting interviews with witnesses, long-form interviews with witnesses. And they took me, Tobe said, you have to come see Cottage Grove, because this is where he met Daryl, who's in the Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, the second Flash of Beauty. That poster's behind me right here. The first one was Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. And Tobe brought back these knee prints, okay, which had some hairs on them. And there's this idea that if you bring back Bigfoot stuff, you're going to get that. I don't like this word, guys, but what they call the hitchhiker effect from the Skinwalker folks and OSAP, right? Okay, so he started getting these weird effects around Daryl's residence, where they had brought some of the knee prints, which, by the way, you can see these casts, at least the last time I saw them. They are at the Area 58 Bigfoot Museum, run by Priscilla Davidson, the organizer of this conference, in Oakridge. And Priscilla took me around last year to show me this really great small Bigfoot museum of books from researchers and lots of pictures. And it's a really great setup. And the knee prints are there from the Owl Moon Labs. And it's one thing, folks, to see this in a photo, but when you see this up close, these huge, they look just like human knees, but like 3 times the size of human knee prints. I mean, 5 times the size. Big knee prints that were found in the soil. Anyways, Tobe took me to that area. You can see these in the Area 58 Bigfoot Museum. Tobe took me there, and there was evidence. Can you see this, folks? Do you see this evidence right here? This is evidence. This was a peanut butter jar that people leave things in Bigfoot areas for the Bigfoot to enjoy. Some people do it for gifting, relationships, reciprocity, to create a relationship with the Bigfoot. And people will do this in many areas. Will leave apples and peanut butter and things that Bigfoot like. And the Bigfoot, in turn, will leave crystals and ancient things from 100 years ago. We don't know where they get these things from, if they're the ones leaving these objects. Maybe they're aports. I don't know exactly. Mummified mice with braided in field grass, and very interesting things that the Squatch like to leave. And by the way, they have a relationship with humans. The Native Americans talk about trading relationships. As you'll remember, I talked to a native from the Spokane tribe, Neil, in Forks, a couple of years ago, said his grandfather traded with Sasquatch medicinal plants for salmon. The grandfather was a salmon fisherman. And you'll hear this all over and over again. But this is what I found. They showed me this in the Owl Moon Labs that had been knocked off the tree stump where it had been left, because they remember leaving it there. 30 feet away. Now it's empty, but look at this crease in it. It's like to me, it looks like a huge thumb, folks. And this is hard plastic. I can't even undo that. Something popped the top off with a thumb and licked out the peanut butter. That's my interpretation, but this is some real evidence here. Something that maybe a Bigfoot handled. Maybe I should, guys, maybe we should test it for DNA. Right? But look at that. Could you do that? I guess you could, but a human would just unscrew it, right? So it was fun going to these areas. So this is what's fun. I want to show you one more slide here before we get to my little slide presentation, which is, not that guy. That's not a cryptid, that's a chipmunk. This is an ordinary chipmunk, but we need evidence of ordinary creatures. How about this one? Yeah, so this is, excuse me. Yeah, so this is what's fun about these conferences is you sit around and share stories. So why am I saying this? Because as a sociologist, we know that people need to feel comfortable to share information, okay? Yes, these are anecdotal stories you're getting from people, but that's how people who've experienced events like this, which are potentially traumatic, feel comfortable sharing their stories. Because as you know, and some of you know that who are experiencers, you are not always going to get an open audience to your experiences everywhere because of fear of ridicule, ostracism, hostility, fear of losing your job, all these things that people experience who relate events about Bigfoot, cryptid, and UFOs, and all the full range of what we call paranormal phenomena. So, in an event like this, people will sit around and they will actually share experiences, and they will come up to your table and share experiences. So here's what some of the experiences I experienced of people coming up to my book table right here after my talk. Okay. One woman from Cottage Grove told me, now think about this, guys, and then I'm going to show you just some of the slides that I was going to show at the presentation. By the way, Corks, the answer to your question is I haven't seen too much of the Peter Kane event, so I can't comment on it. I just don't know because I haven't looked at it yet. But there's always new evidence coming forward, and I think we're going to see more evidence, just like we have in the UFO field in the Bigfoot Sasquatch area. Okay, so this woman came up to me and said, what I saw was a Bigfoot coming out of the woods near my home. It was kind of closed in like this, and it had its hands like this as it came out of the woods. And it was dragging the shadows of the trees with it. Dragging the shadow of the trees. Okay? So this is some sort of like electronuclear collapse. Where's my Takeaki Matsumoto? When I need him. Okay, guys. It was dragging the shadows of the trees. So I said to her, let's come up with a name for this, shadow gravity. That's something that can literally affect light. Now, you hear this all the time. If you read stories about this, you hear things like this all the time. In different forms. It was dragging the shadows with it from the trees. Okay, does that sound like a normal animal? Like it was warping space-time. You know, shadows are the absence of light. How do you pull the absence of something? Okay, shadow gravity. Think about that one. Another guy came up. He said he had seen this on the Easedy Ranch. 8 or 9 people saw a Bigfoot emerge from a wooded area, and it disappeared. he was the only one that saw this because he was closer. He said the Bigfoot turned into trails of water vapor. Okay? It turns into trails of water vapor. So, uh, yes, Gordon, we're about to get into this about the permittivity and what I personally think is going on here. But I'm just sharing you the stories. That is really what we're talking about. But let me just share some of these stories. I've been hearing these stories at conferences like this for a couple of years, and I think it is all coming together in a way that makes sense. And it's the same sorts of stories again, turning into trails. I'm not saying it literally turned into water vapor. That's what this guy said it looked like. Another person said he was hunting with someone up near Oakridge, north of there. And you get a lot of stories from hunters because they're out there in the woods. And he said it became completely silent, right? Which we're going to look at in a second. The whole area became silent. They couldn't. The leaves were rustling, but they couldn't hear them. Right? What's called the acoustic shadow effect, or some people call it. It's been referred to as acoustic induction in the tradition of Michael Faraday, like an inductive effect on acoustics from electromagnetism. Right? And then there was a fellow that came up, and so those were three very interesting stories. And then another fellow came up to me, Doug, and he said near Oregon, California, he had been crossing over on a smaller highway, and there was one right in the road, and he saw it from 8 to 10 feet away. Okay, and in his description of it, what he described, it was so detailed. Shoulders 4 feet across, right? It's this kind of football linebacker, our football guys in the U.S., that type of football linebacker with the shoulder pads, like he said it was Arnold Schwarzenegger on steroids. Okay? Think about that. Just huge. 10 feet high. Okay? And turned and looked at him, and he described the way the hair came down on the back almost like a cape, right? And just the facial features, the nose, sort of like ape-like, kind of more squat, and just everything is oversized. And he pointed to a tree, which was right next to me, which I don't quite have the slide of it here. I'll see if I can find it before we're done. Rob Alley, who is a researcher from the Seattle area, who's written these great books, Brushes with Bigfoot and Raincoast Sasquatch, and is just one of the best researchers out there. He has all these stories since he used to live in Alaska, worked as a physical therapist for the state, and he's taught in universities physiology and physical anthropology. He's all these great stories from Alaska and the west coast of Canada and northwest areas, all the way down to the U.S. Native stories and other people who've lived in these areas. And those are in his books, and they're really worth reading. Again, it's sort of like being at a conference like this, just because you read these stories and it's just all these cases like these close encounters. And Rob is a great sketch artist too. So he does these great sketches also. So Rob had put up a 9-foot poster of a Bigfoot. And people will do that at these conferences just to give you a sense of scale of how tall 9 feet is. 9 feet is like way up there. And this is one of the paradoxes here, folks. Is how it's something that big stay this hidden for so many years. Well, Doug said, you see that Sasquatch poster that Rob had put on a tree? Mine was a foot taller than that. And this this poster was 9 feet up, and yes, I have it right here. Okay, let me just show you this again, and then we're going to go to the slides. Okay, do you see how tall that poster is of the Sasquatch? If you run into one, folks, this is what you're talking about running into. Something that's as high as the ceilings in the room that you're in right now or higher. And Doug said to me, it was a foot bigger than that, next to your vehicle. Okay? We're talking really big. And so the mystery here has been, how is something that big stay this hidden unless there's extraordinary physics involved? Or maybe it's not extraordinary. Maybe this is ordinary. For those of you who've been listening to Bob Greenyer's channel, this is actually how nature works. It has these transmutational characteristics built in to how things work: electromagnetic collapse, regeneration, transmutation, and some of the effects we're going to get into in a sec that Ken Shoulders talked about based on what Gordon mentioned a few minutes ago about lowering permittivity, what that means, and why that creates decoupled electromagnetic processes and life forms decoupled from our ordinary reality. And that's what this is all about, is essentially what people are sharing at these conferences are experiences that, in my view, come from a decoupled reality that Ken Shoulders talked about, Takeaki Matsumoto, and many of these Russian researchers. I'll show you a slide in a moment from I.M. Shakparanov, and people that dealt with long-lived plasmoids like Bogdanovich and others. And there's many different ways to kind of create these systems, but the essence of it is that you're changing the permittivity, as Gordon mentioned a few moments ago. Gordon from the UK, and thanks for joining us all the way from the UK right now. Permittivity and permeability, the two fundamental constants that determine the speed of propagation of electromagnetic signals. And in an area where you have a non-radiating boundary, a contained area, if you change permittivity or permeability, the magnetic constant, which are normally set at 1, it's going to change the propagation of the speed of light. And as Ken Shoulders told us, it's going to create decoupled life forms and electronic processes and micro ball lightning, that Freiberger called mobile luminous objects. So let's Wiltshire. Oh, so Gordon, Wiltshire is sort of been my second home. I've been out there so many times, Gordon, because I don't know what area you're in. We stayed in Marlborough, and we looked at all those crop circles around there. I started going there in '97. So Wiltshire is just like a great place. It's about 2 hours west of London, and it has Avebury and Dolmens and Stone Circles, and Stonehenge is about an hour south of there towards Amesbury. And we had a lot of great times out there. We stayed at the Castle and Ball. And Marlborough is one of I believe it was the largest market town in the UK. It just, the high street one goes on forever and ever. Unfortunately, there was a fire there, as often happens, over the centuries, and the center of the town burnt down, and it was rebuilt on the outsides, and there's still a market there. But it's, I believe, Gordon, if I'm not mistaken, the longest market street in the UK. In any case, yeah. So this is what I'm going to show you in a second, some of these. So let's get into it here. I'm going to set this up. Let me, 1 second. I'm going to put up the screen here. Okay, 1 second here. Okay. Now I'm going to go. All right. Can you all see that? Hello, Mind Forked. Welcome. Um, okay, so this is, guys, what I'm going to show you in the remaining time, and I'm going to go through these sort of quickly, and then we can just have some questions. But this is my understanding of these phenomena, you know, um, the best of my ability. I really think we've cracked it, folks. I'm just going to come out and say that I've been looking at this for a long time, and it didn't make sense till I came across Bob Greenyer's work at the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project of how these phenomena are interrelated. This is how I got into it. It wasn't through the study of what was called cold fusion, then low energy nuclear reaction, and now it's been given the name coherent energy transformations. I came across it through remote viewing, what I call resonant viewing, resonance, and then into the crop circle topic. And this is where I began to see electromagnetic anomalies. And even though I'm not a formally trained physicist, even though I play one on TV, I used to build kits as a kid, and so I'm kind of familiar with the way electricity and magnetism work in circuits and ordinary electronics. So I know when something is weird, and we started encountering weird things in the crop circles. And when I saw from the cold fusion Leonard research that you also got these effects in related areas, and then, well, you can see where this is going. So, yeah. The Honey Street Museum is great, Gordon. It's in Alton Barnes. Yeah, that is where Honey Street is located. I've been to that the last time I was there. Gordon, what happened is we started experiencing a lot of heat in the UK. When I first started, just folks, for those of you that have been dealing with heat this week and smoke wherever you are, when I first started going to the UK, the cars we rented did not have air conditioners, and it didn't matter because it would rain in July, and it was in the 60s, 70s. And maybe for us, Bert Jansch, the great British acoustic guitarist, who, by the way, inspired Jimmy Page to play acoustic guitar the way he did. And some of those early songs that Jimmy Page played, like Black Waterside, he got from Bert Jansch. Bert made this joke once. He was touring the U.S. He said, the summer in the UK, it kind of shows up a couple days in July. In our temperature here in the 80s Fahrenheit, it would get up into the 80s for a couple days. You'd have a couple days of summer at the end of July, if you can remember that, Gordon. And you'd have a couple days in the 80s, maybe go slightly higher, and then be over and go back to the 70s and 60s and rain. But the places we stayed in didn't have air conditioners, and it got very hot to drive people around in the sweltering heat when I'm the driver on the wrong side of the road. No offense intended to those of you in the UK. Driving on the other side, it's challenging. When we get these little fans in the hotels. Guys, you need a full night's sleep to drive people around to see crop circles, especially in a country where it's in the pre-Napoleonic sides of the road, on the left side of the road, which I am told is actually the way it used to be. You would traverse on the left side. Apparently, you would traverse the left side of the road because it allowed your other hand to whip out your sword if necessary, or your dagger with your right hand. This is what Ron Russell told me. In any case, it got kind of hot. So, yeah, we'll talk about the ECETI wrench in a second. Okay, so here's what's going on, folks. I want to show you what I think is... I'm just seeing how do I move my little picture out of the way. I'm not as sophisticated as this as some others, but I'll just read this to you. So here's where this is going. Someone said a moment ago that this is cool. Who said this? It's going in a cool direction. This is going in a cool direction because I think the long and the short of it, folks, is we have good scientific reasons, Gordon mentioned this earlier, of why we get this in so-called paranormal encounters. The same phenomena over and over again. It's time to set aside this idea that there's anything supernatural about this. Well, it is. But it fits in the frameworks of physics that we understand that go back to Wilhelm Weber and Kohlrausch in the 1850s in their discovery of the speed of light, while they discovered the telegraph in Göttingen, I believe it was. This goes back hundreds of years to Faraday, Maxwell, and even those that preceded Maxwell, Wilhelm Weber, of some of the fundamental effects on permittivity and permeability, and why we get these same sorts of strange effects around what we call paranormal phenomena. Just like cold fusion LENR has been renamed coherent energy transformations, I think we could do the same with the idea of paranormal. Now, what does para mean? You guys know because you've been listening to Luis Elizondo and OSAP, ATIP UFO stuff. And Luis Elizondo, who's been in the media a lot, he has his book Imminent. He worked in ATIP, which was the successor to OSAP in the Department of Defense UFO programs. He said para means next to you, like parachute and paramedic, right? So it doesn't inherently have to be weird. It just seems weird because you and I live in a Western society that sort of has this idea ever since the church and the scientists made this agreement, we're told, sometime in the Middle Ages, in medieval times, to separate the spirit from the material, right? Science had the realm of the material, and the church would have the realm of the spirit, the Vatican, right? And so we call these things next to paranormal, but these are decoupled structures. And what do we get? Sudden silence. We get this around Bigfoot. We get this around UFOs. You do any research, folks, into anyone's Bigfoot encounters, just go to Sasquatch Chronicles, listen to Wes Germer's. He's up in the episode 1176 the last time I listened. It's over 1,000 episodes with sometimes more than one witness per episode. And you can hear these people telling their stories. You can read many authors' books of witness accounts of what people experience, or talk to them like I've talked to them at conferences. You get a sudden silence, like you don't hear sounds that normally emanate. Now, going back to ball lightning, if you read ball lightning books, and Corky introduced me to a great book by Bychkov last time. I mentioned Vladimir Bychkov, this great Russian ball lightning researcher. He goes into case after case of these ball lightnings. It's great going back to the history of this. There are books that go into the history of these ball lightnings, going back to historical records from hundreds of years ago all over the world, mariners and different cases. And sometimes you get this sudden silence, even around ball lightning, guys. No problem, Mindfork. It's being recorded. We will see you on the flip side when you come back. So, you get this around ball lightning, folks. People have described being at the beach and the ball lightning's going over their heads. And they couldn't hear the waves, just like this hunter story, right? Of at Oakridge, who told me that it became silent. There are descriptions. I recently heard one of these on Sasquatch Chronicles where someone fired over the head of a Sasquatch to scare it away. People react all sorts of ways to Sasquatch because it looks like a person in fur. Even though it's really huge, it feels like a person, and we have this reluctance, most of us, to aim a weapon at another human being, unless it's in like dire self-defense. And so people will shoot around them to try to scare them away. And this person said they couldn't even hear their rifle. It sounded like it had a silencer. So you get this sudden silence. You get the sudden cold. People will say they were hiking and it became suddenly cold. The hues, the color hues will change. People will say colors started looking like they were the dark side of the color spectrum, right? Electromagnetic failures. I'll show you some examples of that in a second around crop circles. I think Bob Greenyer recently referred to this as spurious electromagnetic failure. Time slips. People will say a couple hours of time. And this is UFOs, Sasquatch, ghost encounters, haunted sites. No matter what you want to include here, you get the same sort of things. Sudden anxiety. Now, Jules, who is on the call, who's our moderator today in this live stream, has told me what, and I've heard other people say this, it feels like the anxiety you feel like around the Sasquatch or the cryptid is being projected onto you. It's not coming from inside. It's like a switch is pushed and you get those feelings of anxiety and fear coming up, but then it switches off just like that. Okay. Like some external field. And then another characteristic here, which you get in different type of coherent energy transformation phenomena, is the smell of sulfur. Smells. Joshua Cutchin, who I got to meet at the Contact in the Desert conference last month, or July, yes, in June, May, June, wrote this book called Brimstone Deceit. The weird smells around paranormal phenomena. Now, we were on a panel together, and I said, and he kind of made fun of the book because it's about, strange smells in, around Sasquatch and UFOs and haunted sites. Even ghosts, people smell like gunpowder. But my view is that Cold Fusion Leonard does a good job of explaining why you get these transmutations of elements, and oxygen-16 can become sulfur-32, plenty of oxygen around, and you get transmutation effects around these types of processes, which could account for why people smell this. Now, these odors. Now, it doesn't mean that Bigfoot doesn't have their own particular body smell. That might be true too, but it's a very pungent smell. And it can actually kind of create a stinging feeling in your eyes, as people describe. If you go back in my broadcast here, when I interviewed Gary Anderson, the host of Night Dreams Talk Radio out of Gig Harbor, Washington, he described in this account in BC of in the car with the windows rolled up, the blinding effects of that sulfur smell, which makes you wonder whether it's a chemical effect or if it's a resonant effect. Because we know from the way smell works, it's not completely chemical. Two molecules that have the same structure can smell differently to you, which is why people who've studied this, I believe it was James Burke, the science writer from the UK, talked about this. Or was it Jim Khalili, who has a YouTube channel, Khalil, about quantum mechanics right now with these recent videos about different interpretations of quantum mechanics and so forth. That there's a quantum aspect to smell. I know we have all been brought up in this sort of physical model to think that smell is completely chemical, but the exact same molecule, I think it's almonds. Is it almonds and cyanide have the same structure but smell differently because the resonance is different from the molecules? In any case, there are these smells around. Go read Joshua Cutchin's The Brimstone Deceit. It goes through case after case of these types of phenomena of these smells. And even in ghost sightings, you have these gunpowder smells, sulfur smells. And this is called, the brimstone. It goes back hundreds and thousands of years to the smell of brimstone being associated with Satan and so forth. Guys, you're kind of getting the picture here. So let's move on here. So ball lightning, you can look at these historical accounts of ball lightnings. It's something that's been with us for a long time and been seen in different contexts. Free floating fireballs that even though they're like a free-floating fireball with tendrils like you see here. This is often reported coming off the ball as these little tendrils. It doesn't necessarily, it's not hot to the touch. It can often be cold. And kind of increase that feeling of cool. Now, it can boil water, as we've heard, and there have been estimates on the power of ball lightning, the energetic density of ball lightning, based on the fact how long it takes to boil a tub of water. But that's not because it's emitting heat, it's because it's emitting something, electromagnetic energy, perhaps microwaves, and it can emit a lot of energy. Now, I've corresponded with people who've encountered ball lightning, and that 1995 Air Force sponsored paper by J. Reese Roth, who Bob Grenier has mentioned several times, what ball lightning is trying to tell the fusion community, since there is a direct connection to ball lightning and fusion energy and Air Force research, is that 20% of the U.S. population, 5% of the U.S. population has encountered ball lightning. I'll show you some of my photos of it in a second. That's 1 out of 20 people. It's just like it's a hidden event, because if you talk to people who've seen this, you don't know what you've seen, and typically it lasts a few seconds. I've seen some that have lasted a few seconds. So you don't even have a name for it. It's like below the limit, as we say in remote viewing. It's below the threshold of public discussion. People don't know what they've seen. Okay, so I'm going to move this around a little bit. So, so this was Hal Puthoff giving us a lecture in 2018. Now, as Gordon mentioned before, there's a direct connection to permittivity and permeability, and this is, Gordon, what the OSAP program found. Hal was the main, I guess, scientific lead investigator for OSAP. This was the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. Wow, quite an acronym. Now, if you look at any of James Lukaski's recent books, he has 4. And it starts with skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and then there is the subsequent books, Initial Revelations, and other books around this theme, skinwalkers at the Pentagon. He says that OSAP was not a foreign technology research program by DoD. It was a UFO program, a UFO research program disguised as a foreign technology research program. And this is how things are often done with government programs, as you know, in any country where you are, is that these acronyms are used to disguise what the program was about. There was a predecessor to OSAP called the Advanced Physics Research Program, who was the author of that. His book was Reality Denied. His name will come back to me in a second, from Las Vegas, who worked in these programs. He said the same thing. It was not an advanced physics research program. It's a UFO program, but no one can if the people do a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, on UFOs, you won't come up with advanced physics research program. OSAP was the same way. Now, what's interesting is Lukatsky is one of our best witnesses here, because, for one thing, the guy is a missile systems analyst for DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. He's looking at the capacities of adversaries' missile systems. He worked for the DWO, Defense Warning Office. And he's telling us in these interviews recently with George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell on their Weaponized channel that a UFO sighting is always more than a UFO sighting. And this is what Jacques Vallée has been saying all these years too. And why would that be? Why would you get all these strange effects, the ones I just showed you in the previous slide about sudden cold, sudden silence, time slips, the like, if a UFO is just a metal ship with little guys and gals getting in it from another planet and coming to visit us? Right? It's because, as Lakatsky said, the paranormal is inherently intertwined with UFO sightings, which doesn't fit the conventional UFO model if it's just other people from other planets visiting us in their metallic craft. And Hal gave us an idea why that would be true in this presentation in 2018, Society for Scientific Exploration, International Remote Viewing Association joint meeting in Las Vegas. And he showed us these materials that they had been studying in OSAP, these metamaterials. And this was the bismuth magnesium materials that, and we're going to see why these have an effect, but basically Hal made the argument that these metamaterials, folks, are materials, man-made materials for the most part, that act like waveguides, where the structure, microfine structure, is smaller than the wavelength you're attempting to influence. And in this case, really microfine structures can influence permittivity of free space where they occupy the space. Permittivity, we should just say, is the susceptibility of a material to polarize when it's in the presence of an electrical field. And high permittivity materials, often insulators, will polarize and will get charge separation in the presence of high permittivity. And as the permittivity goes lower, these materials will descreen themselves and become more transparent to external electric fields and maintain their internal coherency, like ball lightning and phenomena in the family of ball lightning, which are low permittivity processes. And Hal argued that these UFO metamaterials will lower the permittivity of space, free space, that they're in. And they oscillate and they change the speed of light, which leads phenomena that are made of bilayered materials like this, like bismuth magnesium, to shift electromagnetic frequencies as the speed of light increases, because permittivity and permeability, speed of light, as Weber and Kohlrausch discovered, is 1 over square root of permittivity by permeability. That defines the speed of propagation of electromagnetic signals. Yes, I've been studying this recently. And since permeability and permittivity and permeability are in the denominator as the square root, as they get smaller, divided into 1, speed of light increases, shifting frequencies higher into the Blueshift, which Hal told us is why UFOs lead people to get burns, and ball lightning can have people be radiated with ultraviolet frequencies and gamma radiation, okay? Non-ionizing radiation from the frequency of the wavelength. And this is why it's not recommended that people expose themselves to UFOs or orbs or micro ball lightning or any of that. Lakatsky goes into many cases from Skinwalker Ranch where people had medical injuries from encountering ball lightning, even deaths of farm animals like those dogs that chased those 3 blue orbs from the Sherman account, and they were turned into puddles of fat, according to the Shermans, the previous owners before Bigelow of Skinwalker Ranch. Because, okay, this is a question I can't completely resolve, and you'll all have their own ideas. is that are these orbs like at the Skinwalker Ranch type areas? Are they conscious, or is this purely a function of the physics of blue shifted wavelengths? Now, I interviewed Gary Sterling on my YouTube channel, a former missile security guard from Minot Air Force Base in the early 70s, and he encountered one of these objects that was shifted blue. If you listen to the interview, go back on my YouTube channel. And he described getting burned by the object, which he said was hovering by a missile silo in Velva. Is it Velva, North Dakota, I believe. It's right on the border there with South Dakota, Velva, North Dakota. He and the other guy in the security alert team Jeep were both burned by this object that was hovering by a missile silo and took off vertically. I asked Gary what did it look like. He said it was so bright you couldn't see any definable form, which fits what Hal is talking about here. But not only were they burned, the Jeep was burned, their M16s were burned, the seats were burned, everything on the right side. This is what Hal talked about here. Now, Hal called this space-time metric engineering. Right. So these are allegedly UFO materials. I'm not sure about the bismuth magnesium. I mean, I wasn't there, whoever collected this sample. I don't know about the provenance of these particular samples, but these are one of the materials that Hal studied that he said causes this blue shift by lowering the permittivity in the space that it's in with by changing the lowering the permittivity, the speed of light is increased, and these objects now exist in their own frame of reference that's separate from ours. And they look bluish, and they have a different space-time configuration, and it's deliberate. And Hal told us this is how some UFOs actually create propulsion, is simply by decreasing the density of the space-time field ahead of the craft and increasing the density behind it. It would just move without any means of propulsion like we use. Now, I did ask Hal about any other materials, and I was told he can't talk about it, quote unquote. Okay, which other people have told me this is his response when you try to go beyond whatever NDAs he's signed as part of these programs. So I don't know about other materials, but this is the basis of how it works. So space, just hold that in your mind for a second, space-time metric engineering. My encounter with this subject started with crop circles. And Gordon, you might know this area. This is Woodborough Hill by Alton Barnes. And we were actually out there at the time, and this German tourist took a picture of this orb in the center. I'll see at the end if I can. I took a picture over West Overton of one that was glowing. I mean, it was below a cloud, and it had a red top and a blue bottom, which suggests a rotation. According to Zadalepin from one of his recent presentations that Bob showed us, that when ball lightning rotates, it's like going like 20-30% the speed of light and causes a redshift effect. And I think you can see this in the video if I can pull it up here. But I've shown this before in my other presentations. It's the West Overton footage that I recorded for about 30 seconds. So anyway, folks, I'm just showing you I've seen this in crop circle country. These, in my view, are mobile luminous objects, as David Freiberger calls them from Stanford Linear Accelerator Center in his research into vortons, these dense magnetic vortex-like structures that also create these sort of space-time effects from the changes in permeability, which are the magnetic constant. And Freiberger puts them all into the same category, whether it's Hess-Stalin lights, orbs, micro-ball lightning ball. He calls them MLOs, mobile luminous objects. Now, we did see, we've seen these effects in different crop circles where people's devices stop working spontaneously. And I've seen this many times. And here's a picture of Colin Andrews, the crop circle researcher, now lives in Connecticut. And it happened to he was one of our guest experts. This is south of Marlborough. I think it's by some place called Giant's Grave. It's interesting that, it's interesting in the UK, you have a lot of things about giants this and giants that, Giant's Causeway. In Ireland and the UK, as a whole, you have these, this was Giant's Grave. So are these Bigfoot of ancient times in the UK? Are they named? Because, folks, in the US, everywhere where Bigfoot have been seen, which it's a new term since 1957, by Jerry Crew from Bluff Creek. And by the way, the controversy around Bluff Creek, I mean, there's been Bigfoot activity around Bluff Creek for a long time. Not just the Patterson-Gimlin film. Is that those areas are called, excuse me a sec, Devil's this or Devil's that or something like that. Devil's Mountain, Devil's area. Those are where wild men were seen, as they were called. So we would have this consistently in some cameras, not every single one, but a lot of our cameras and batteries would operate this way. So now here's one interesting thing to think, about balls of lightning. I was visiting a friend in Salt Lake. I was recording in her basement a video about our upcoming crop circle tour about 10 years ago. And she came home and we went out to dinner, and her roommate came home, who was a nurse at a local hospital. And he said there was an orange orb that in the window that came into the room through the glass. And ball lightning's been known to do this because it's not a physical object. It's a soliton, so it's like a standing wave. He saw this. Now, he didn't know I'd been recording a video about crop circles, and I mentioned orbs and things like this in the video. I've been looking to find the exact video. So we came back from dinner, and he was like all shook up. He had seen this orange orb in the basement window that actually looks like this. The window did. It's that sort of thing. And it was a room that had been set up as a TV room, bedroom, with a small kitchen in it. And so, folks, this is like the hitchhiker effect stuff from Lukatsky, right? Even talking about orbs led one to show up, or something like that, folks. I don't know. You think about it. So here's Igor Burtsev and Don Monroe at the Bailey Sasquatch conference. It was called the America-Russia Conference. Now, Igor Burtsev is a Russian researcher of Bigfoot for a really long time, like 50 years or something. He's a former political scientist, PhD in political science. He talked about Sasquatch, and they have a name for them in Russian, Almasty, which is sort of like a relative of Bigfoot Sasquatch, as far as I understand. And he talked about people seeing Sasquatch go invisible, okay? In Moscow areas. He said one of them, they could measure the height of the telephone pole behind it, so they got the feeling it was 9 feet. And he said it disappeared like a sheet of light that kind of came up and it disappeared. And I have been to conferences here in the U.S. where I've talked to witnesses who've seen them like this, where they said it digitized, like pixelated. Now, again, these are people that have really never shared their stories with anyone before, but they feel comfortable at a conference sharing them with you. And so this is evidence of some space-time permittivity effect. Let's just leave it at that for the moment. But I mean, here it says cross-continental witnesses describing the same effect around large hairy creatures. Now, one of the reasons that crop circles could do this is because the helical pattern can form a dielectric configuration. This is like a dielectric is like an insulator that can polarize and create charge separation, right? And so this is one way that you can get permittivity changing even from a swirled shape. Now, folks, this has always mystified me how an insulator like wheat standing up like this in stalks could create electromagnetic effects. But according to the mathematics, the tensor mathematics, and you could ask Bob McGuire more about this because he's very good at tensors. We've been talking about that. You can get modulation and permittivity just from spiral-like shapes if it's precise and there's parts of the crop that are up and down. Just think about that for a moment. And, one objection you may have to this is, yeah, that's very interesting, Gordon. And we're going to talk about that because I've been looking at, that's where we're going with this is what geologies, what minerals in the soil, and I was talking about this with Jules yesterday on the phone, is what types of minerals, this is what the punchline is going to be at the end. I'm just going to give it away. Is what types of soils and minerals and geological configurations lead to charge separation, which leads to these permittivity modulating effects and paranormal hotspots. And some of them may have specific resonant frequencies, and in crop circles you do have them in clay soils and chalk. Those white horses, Gordon, around your area are made of chalky soils there, all the way up through Swindon area. And you have large aquifers underneath Wiltshire. Again, a source of charge separation. But one thing I want to mention here is people say, oh, speed of light, it's fixed. Speed of light's fixed. Einstein, before he won his Nobel Prizes, at least for his work in general relativity, wrote 2 papers on the variable speed of light. I believe they're 1908 and 1911. And Alexander Unsicker on his YouTube channel goes into this in great detail, how this was Einstein's best idea that never got developed, is that light has a variable speed. Now, as a constant in your frame of reference, it seems fixed, but it can change relative to another frame of reference. It could be faster or slower. To you, it always seems like it has a fixed speed, but as it changes relative to another frame of reference, it's going to speed up or slow down. And Einstein said this was a function of mass and density, affecting gravity, affecting speed of light. So we have precedents for variable speed of light going back a century. So when you get changes in permittivity and permeability, you're going to get very interesting effects. You're going to get these electromagnetic cavity structures, which can form box-like formations. And this goes to one of the mysteries of these portal areas, is where you get, just jumping to the structure of ball lightning vortex plasma-like cores, where you get these self-organized plasmas, plasma being the 4th state of matter, but ball lightning, self-organized coherent matter being like a 5th state of matter. And you could read the Lockheed Martin patent on systems and methods for generating coherent matter wave beams for more, cut and dried, kind of straightforward discussion of this for the Lockheed Martin patent. It leads to standing wave modes, which Bob has been demonstrating for us recently with the Standing Wave Project and the O Animator, which looks at these types of structures and allows you to simulate different conditions. It would be very interesting, folks, if we can simulate a box-like standing wave structure, because now, why am I saying this? Let's go back to evidence. People have been reporting these box-like structures around any of these portal areas. They've been seen at the meadows that Trey Hudson has written about. And I met Trey Hudson at the Snippy conference, where I'll be again in August. 12th through 15th in Moscow, Colorado. And Trey Hudson has been researching another skinwalker-like area in the southeast, somewhere in Jewel's neck of the woods. He hasn't given away the exact location because they don't want a lot of people going there. But you get box-like structures. You get this at Skinwalker Ranch. Remember where they saw, like, the Shermans saw, like, a box-like structure? They thought it was an RV camping on their property until it took off in the air. Buddy Bolton, who's a friend of the channel, we've done the Realities Edge show in the past, discussed with me this door-like structure, that it was a UFO, and this is under the newer ownership, post-Bigelow, Brandon Fugel's ownership of Skinwalker Ranch, where they had an object that only made right-angle motions that looked like a square. And of course, Katie Page talked about these being at the Rocky Mountain Ranch in Elbert County, Colorado. Anyway, I guess I was curious how a vortex plasmoid shape could create a box. And this is how it can happen, okay? It is a standing wave structure. So there's a relationship between charge clusters, exotic vacuum objects, topological monopoles. These are temporary magnetic monopoles, all related to ball lightning. And again, as Gordon mentioned before, related to changes in permittivity, declining because in a fixed displacement field, according to Maxwell's equations, as you can see at the bottom of this diagram, if you have permittivity going lower, the energy density has to increase. It's a function of a fixed displacement field. It doesn't happen in every displacement field, but where you have a toroidal cluster like this, you're going to get closed loop topology, as it's called, and it's going to lead to ball lightning structures, right? Okay. And these sorts of things were seen by Takeaki Matsumoto in his underwater spark discharge experiments, which, Bob Greenyer has done a great job going over there and getting all of Takeaki Matsumoto's materials, which he told Bob he was going to throw away. He didn't think anyone was interested. Any case, this is a micro ball lightning strike from one of his itonic cluster objects, which is a very tightly bound electromagnetically degenerating structure, which forms a very small little cluster, an exotic vacuum object in Ken Shoulder's language. Now, Bob has created a newer version of this, which he did in his Kickstarter project, which I have right behind me. Excuse me. With highly improved photos here. Highly improved photos from the original book, which you can still get on Amazon for $10. But the new version, which I believe he's turning into a book, which you'll be able to purchase, which those of us who are participating in the Kickstarter project, were able to get, has these really super high scans of these types of objects, which is really cool. So here's the relationship mathematically between lower permittivity cavities and vortex soliton standing wave structures. Very interesting. So Hal Puthoff referred to space-time metric engineering as if extraterrestrials, or what we call non-human intelligence, NHI as it's called now, is deliberately creating materials that modulate the structure of space-time, which would explain why you get a lot of these strange effects around UFOs. I mean, I've spoken to people that have said the area around the UFO got cold, just like Bigfoot sightings and ghost sightings. So there is a direct relationship between these vortex solitons and lower permittivity, and it relates to acoustic compression, what's called the acoustic shadow effect, because even using cavitation or other methods of acoustic compression, like Bigfoot may be able to do with the volumes that they're able to generate or the coherency of the sound, their coherent sound modulation. And the reason we think that, yeah, Jules is saying the smoke. So, guys, we've had a lot of smoke out here where I'm at in the US. There's been a lot of smoke, and you can see it's affecting my voice a little bit, so we'll speak a little quieter. It's very challenging to be in a smoky area, and you can shut your windows, but then it gets kind of hot, and it's challenging. But it's better today, the smoke. But there is an effect. So smoke is not really good for your lungs in the long run. We can see this. In any case, let's move on here. People report Bigfoot making the loudest growl, howl, shriek they ever heard in their life. Like they describe it like a woman shrieking being killed or something. It sounds like that. They have two sets of vocal cords, according to Scott Nelson, that studied the Sierra sounds, the work from the Johnson brothers and Ron Moorhead, and that is coming out in a third Flash of Beauty film, Sierra Sounds, Sounds of the Wilderness. I forget what the title is exactly. Sierra Sounds, Sounds of Sounds, Voices in the Wilderness. I think that's what it's called. I would contend, as I argue in this upcoming film, that some of these cryptid creatures and Bigfoot can focus their sounds. Bob called it a sazer, like a laser, like it's coherent sound, okay? It's very different than sound than you and I are used to, because sounds usually propagate in a non-orderly way all around. This is like a focus sound because other people don't hear it in the same campground. And people will say it sounded like a freight train, the yell. It's enough to make your internal organs shake. But there is a relationship between acoustic compression, energy collapse like we get in cavitation bubbles, sonoluminescence, vortex formation, to electromagnetic coupling and field unscreening, which is the effect of lower permittivity. And in case you're wondering, I mean, the relationship here, it's pretty clear from Maxwell's equations going back to the 1880s. And by the way, people did not accept Maxwell's ideas at the time, by and large, or Faraday, the Newtonians. This was thought of as paranormal electromagnetic fields 150 years ago, okay? And going back to Wilhelm Weber. But if D is a conserved field, like you get in a conserved space, like in a tornado, it's going to lower the permittivity, as Gordon mentioned, and the energy density has to increase. And if you have charge separation combined with that type of energy density, you can get the charges slamming together again to create that small box effect, as Bob has called it, where you're going to get coherent matter, ball lightning, microball lightning, and some of the effects that we even see around tornadoes. It's not just the vortex cooling effect, because anytime you get a vortex structure like this, cooling effect, it's going to absorb energy from the environment and create a cooling effect, whether it's a tornado or a microball lightning. So this is the relation between a vortex structure and temperature change. And it's not a field weakening effect, it's just a permittivity changing effect, as this slide shows. So this is why you get intense electric fields around permittivity induction. Now, once you have intense electric fields, you're going to get some of these strange effects on our devices and cameras, in my view. And you're going to get charge separation, the charges recombining, which Gerald Pollack argues in his newer book, Charged. This is this follow-up to Fourth Phase of Water. This is a really intense book because Pollack makes this argument, and he says he has this funny thing, the going out on a limb meter. Every time he makes one of these arguments, which he realizes his engineering friends might ridicule, he has the going out on the limb meter, how far out in the limb of the tree is he. His son did the illustrations. He says that everything in our reality is from charge and charge separation, including insects flying, the Viktor Grubnikov effect of repeated geometrical hexagonal structures modifying space-time. Birds flying, quote-unquote, without flapping. Airplanes flying upside down. All sorts of anomalies that show that the Bernoulli principle is not what we're dealing with here. It's electrostatic charge. And he goes through all these different effects of electrostatic charge in our reality, including discussions of tornadoes like Charles Chandler does in his paper, The Electromagnetic Basis of Supercell Tornadoes, which I ran into a couple of years ago, just looking at vortex effects. Again, my interest in the vortex effects just comes from the circular spiral pattern of crop circles. But this does turn out to be one of the central structures of, reality, of linear cold fusion. So there's multiple ways to get to EVO type structure. You can get it from sharp points and edges, which is what Hal was showing us in his dielectric permittivity enhancing materials at the IRVA conference, which is all OSAP has shown us so far. We're not getting a ton from those guys, are we? I mean, we do have James Lukatsky's books. Sharp Edges and Points, which is Vittorio, just one presentation I heard since I haven't been to the cold fusion conferences yet. Vittorio Violante at I think it was 2015 in San Francisco, talked about these edges and these cracks in palladium being essential for creating the cold fusion effect. Magnetic and spiral shapes, aka crop circles, but any sort of spirals will do. Layered and dielectric boundaries, the Hal Puthoff stuff, leads to autogeneration of plasmoid formations. Vortex structures, self-confined fields, which leads to the energy intensifying effects, and resonance chambers, standing waves, cavities, which increases energy density and lowers permittivity. So what the effect of this lower permittivity is, and I have to tell you, sometimes some of these discussions with ChatGPT, in my case, have been helpful because it's been pointing out that it's not just lower permittivity that matters. It's these sharp, abrupt changes, the gradient of change. Sharp changes in permittivity will lead to these charge clusters forming, okay? And according to the work of Ken Shoulders, which I've mentioned several times, it leads to decoupling of these structures from our typical reality and what Shoulders called black organizations with ghostly properties. Perhaps the same thing that Zverblis and Nevesky found when they were looking at what they called electromagnetic phantoms from those hypertoroidal fractal bagel structures. They were looking at those Soviet electromagnetic experiments. We've talked about this in other videos, and Bob Grenier was the one that got this paper from researchers in Russia about fractal bagel structures. Toroidal shapes like this, but more loops on loops on loops in a different poloidal direction. Toroidal. You got the idea. Fractal structures. Essentially, guys, the take-home message is that fractal structures lead to this decoupling of different types of fractal electromagnetic structures. Fractal types of structures. And we saw this in the work of Shak Paranov, a Russian researcher, Soviet, I believe, researcher, showed this with his Mobius strips. Experiments, which is another way to create these charge clusters by creating a Mobius strip. And I think it's sending electrons through with radio wave um, enhanced resonance. Paranormal was able to demonstrate oscillating permittivity. And he said it would create a blue shift. He said, bluish ionizing plasmas were seen around these experiments. And can you see it in this slide here? Black ball lightning. This invisible ball lightning, same thing as the bright one at the bottom here. Can you see this in the experiments? It's in the slide on the right too. A black ball lightning. It's either dark or it becomes transparent. So it's another type of non-radiating ball lightning. Instead of ionizing the air around us, perhaps through some sort of electromagnetic collapse, some sort of gravitational effect, it's absorbing the light instead, like a black hole. And here's another example from Paranormal of black ball lightning. So, even in some of these experiments, I'm going to, hold on one second, guys. I am going to get a throat spray. So look at that black ball lightning for a second. Just give me 30 seconds. Okay, so the black ball lightning is an example of, in my mind, it's like an analogy of these paranormal types of phenomena and effects, okay? Because it's sort of like inverted and it's like a decoupled structure. And it's things that you read Lukatsky's books, it's things that were seen at very similar to things that were seen at Skinwalker Ranch. They came across these dark shapes which induced a fear effect, which I would contend. Now, I know, guys, I'm oversimplifying here. Maybe. I'm just trying to reduce this, not in a reductionist way, just to kind of see if we're looking at the similar principles here. And that same fear effect, is that the same effect that Jules experienced around her white Bigfoot in Indiana, or is it a different effect? People get that around ball lightning and other effects. So, these are how all the concepts kind of tie together. You get negative effective mass from these particles very close together, field-dominated inertia from short-range attraction, which is what Ken Shoulders found in his lab with all these kind of particles pulling together and the way dust and debris come together and stuff. It creates cold spots, which is very similar to what people experience around ghost-like cold spots and so forth. Now, this is not a new idea. This goes back to the work of Wilhelm Weber, all the way back to 1840s and 1850s, which, based on this third Newtonian law here, which applies to electromagnetic particles, K times Q1, Q2 over R squared. That R squared component, as the distance between the particles gets closer and closer together, it leads to what's referred to as negative inertial mass, hypothetically Alcubierre warp drives, superconductivity, and all these really interesting effects. And perhaps what we're talking about here is all the same sort of thing, is that this superconductivity is a type of electromagnetic collapse where the particles get so close together that it just goes into this high state of high attraction, which leads to the formation of exotic vacuum objects, Matsumoto's itonic clusters, and these warp-like effects, space-time metric engineering. Now, I would say that what we're dealing with here is, since it happens from creatures on the Earth like Bigfoot and cryptids, and I'm making the argument here that this is the same effect. You could disagree. You don't have to agree with me. I'm just taking an Einsteinian point of view here from my own scientific training, is that you kind of want to simplify some of these principles over time to see if you're dealing with the same thing. The equivalence principle is that they're not all separate phenomena. They kind of unify into this sort of evopermittivity, short-range attraction framework. And so what we're dealing with here, in my view, is not just technologically space-time metric engineering. It's a type of endogenous space-time modulation that biological creatures can do also, like Bigfoot and the other types of cryptids that we're familiar with. So they're doing what Hal talked about. They're just doing it naturally. Okay? And again, when I first came across this from the work of Andrei Koktoris, and he was having an interview with Alexander Unziker, and he talked about this short-range attraction, I'm thinking, and Weber talking about this in the 1840s. Well, it was implied from his particle-to-particle interaction. Before the idea of electromagnetic field, it was just interaction between particles. They still came up with the accurate speed of light using this framework, and it implied superconductivity and anomalous physics effects, warp drives. I mean, they didn't understand this back then, but that's what it implies in our modern time, is a contraction of space-time. Now, Ken Shoulders talked about this short-range attraction. Takeaki Matsumoto talked around this short-range attraction. K.P. Kouropoulos in his paper around short-range attraction, and Bob Greener pointed this out a long time ago, is we have all been educated in the idea that like charges repel, right? Electrons and so forth. The same charges repel. Magnetic poles, you put the same pole together, it repels. But at a very short distance, you get an attractive force, and that comes out of Newton's third law. You get an attractive force which produces another convoluted type of electromagnetic effects, what we're talking about here. And it leads to all these types of coherent charge condensation, including changes to vacuum permittivity states and warp effects. So the reason I'm just showing you this is these concepts are all related, and it relates back to exotic vacuum objects, these charge clusters that Ken Shoulders called EVOs, after some other initial names. David Freiberger's Vortons is related to this, right? And again, ChatGPT wants to give us a caveat here that this is hypothetical, but I think we've seen evidence from it. I mean, Hal is giving us showing us evidence of this at the IRVA SSE presentation in Vegas in 2018. By the way, we got to go visit Bigelow Aerospace right after that presentation. These folks had arranged it for us to go visit Bigelow Aerospace for their modular space capsules. But the New York Times article in 2017, just the year before, had mentioned Bigelow Aerospace as housing a special room where non-terrestrial, extraterrestrial materials were kept in a vacuum, physical vacuum structure to keep any germs or biological materials from escaping. And it was said to be on that same property in North Vegas. Now, I did ask the security guards coming in on the bus. They came in to check our IDs, since it was a facility that did work with NASA. And I asked them, and one of them said, there's some buildings here I'm not even allowed to go in. So perhaps this building really existed of special material, or a room. And I asked one of the tour guides, and they just laughed it off. But someone at the conference I asked about it said they had been in this room and seen these exotic non-NHI materials. So I would disagree with ChatGPT here and say I don't think it's completely evidence-free just because we're being told by Lukatsky, Puthoff, and others that this is what they study in OSAP are these metamaterials from crash retrieval operations of UFOs. And by the way, I mentioned Gary Sterling before, the missile security guard. And he said he had been offered to go on UFO crash retrievals that you could not come back for 6 months. They were out in the sticks, and you did not have time off from it. Once you're out there, you had to stay out there. Very secure operations where they're keeping people away from. And that would have been his job, is to keep people, disguise the site miles away or something like that. So, I mean, we do have evidence of these crash retrievals. I think we'll hear more about this. People want to see evidence of this in Congress. You get the idea. Okay, so let's wrap it up. Ball lightning can dampen sound. You can get this acoustic shadow effect. Again, that's the silence effect you get around Bigfoot and cryptids. You do have evidence of insects, going back to Pollock's book, Charged. Spider ballooning, it has been thought that spiders fly, as Charles Darwin found them on his ship hundreds of miles away from the coast, from wind. But they did experiments in 2018, I think these were in the UK, where they found that in a laboratory, the spiders would levitate just from their filaments with complete absence of wind, which shows that these charge gradients affect animal life, insect life here on the planet. Triboelectric, friction, charge. Maybe when we were walking around the crop circles, it's triboelectricity creating that static charge that we found. But you get some of these dielectric effects even with insects, right? Spider ballooning. Did you know that insects, and then you think about hummingbirds, extremely light birds, are they staying aloft because they're flapping, or is it from charge? Is the flapping just generating triboelectric charge and giving a negative charge to their wings? And is that related to EVO filaments and so forth? Ideas. Anyway, you can see I'm making the argument these ideas are connected. So why would this matter? Because people say no animal can do what Bigfoot does. I disagree. I think we already see in nature. Let's give me a couple. I'm going to show you a couple examples, and then we'll wrap it up. And we'll go to some of your comments, and thanks for listening today. The morpho butterfly. You're all familiar with the morpho butterfly, correct? It doesn't have blue wings because of blue dye or pigment. It's metamaterials. It's these nanostructures which alter the frequency of light, and it only emits blue light and absorbs all the other frequencies of light, which is a type of constructive interference with the light waves because of these multi-layered lamellae, as you can see from this slide. The white light goes in, and there's constructive interference from the little microstructures and layered materials, kind of like Hal's materials. It's a photonic metamaterial, and that's the morpho butterfly. So you already have examples of creatures on Earth changing color, as Jules and I have talked about a whole bunch of times. The octopus can match their background. Cuttlefish can become invisible, right? Now, these are just physical effects, but they're examples of creatures on Earth already doing what Bigfoot does. Now, I'm arguing Bigfoot does it from some sort of triboelectric charge clustering, static charge, because witnesses say, if you listen to their testimony, that there's electrostatic charge around Bigfoot, just like we found in crop circles. And it's amazing to me that there's any sort of connection at all between Bigfoot and crop circles, but there is, because the witnesses report batteries and cameras going dead. Some of the first witnesses I spoke to in Bailey, who had encountered Bigfoot near Rocky Mountain National Park, looking after a friend's cabin who was away, Someone who had a vacation cabin described the iPhone dying with freshly charged battery. The mind fog and all these other weird effects. And then people sometimes see Bigfoot glowing. Just read Rusty Wilson's Washington campfire stories of someone they're describing, seeing them glowing as they came in to try to get their cattle. They were trying to steal cattle rustle, and they were glowing blue. And other people have described them. The Boiling River incident in Yellowstone, where these folks see a blue glow coming off the Bigfoot. But other animals do this too. There are the electric eels, which use some structure called an electrocyte in their muscle structure, which generates that electric charge, which can paralyze their prey. And then, how about the good old pistol shrimp, which uses cavitation to paralyze their prey? It emits sound waves with such intensity that it causes little bubbles of cavitation to form, which creates a type of sonic acoustic collapse. And the bubbles, the pistol shrimp, can affect their prey with sound and the snapping of their jaws together. So I'm just arguing here because this came up on the Matt Beal podcast that I did recently, and I enjoyed being on the Matt Beal show. And the discussion came up whether any animals can do anything like Bigfoot. I think there's some precedence for it. Okay, just like I'm showing you here. And a couple more slides, and then we'll go to your questions. Even the idea of Bigfoot hiding in trees. Now, this came up at the conference. This is an illustration of this. I'm not literally saying they physically move into a tree, but there are reports going back hundreds of years in Northwest U.S. I've talked to a nurse who encountered loggers that she was taking care of in her hospital, who said it would hide behind trees, a big Bigfoot hiding behind a skinny tree. There was a name for these creatures. They called them the hide behind. The hide behind. You go to loggers in the Northwest, there's the hide behind. In caves, we have the Tommy knockers, who warn miners of impending collapse. And in logging, we have the hide behind. And even there is a kind of way of thinking about it this way, of the kind of Grebennikov effect of these repeating fractal structures and cavities in trees and multi-layered surfaces, creating variation in permittivity. And a variation in permittivity. So my feeling about Bigfoot, I think there's something to do with building up charge. I got to see Bigfoot hair at the Oakridge conference from M.K. Davis. He was in that earlier slide I showed of people sitting around my book table. And M.K. was sitting next to me, and he's done all that video analysis of the Patterson-Gimlin film, and he had some hair allegedly from a Bigfoot sighting. And it's very fine hair, and it's easy to see why that could build up electrostatic charge. And so there is a sort of idea of a relationship between the cavernous structure affecting the permittivity of trees and Bigfoot kind of being compatible with this. I mean, this is sort of an AI slide, and I'd like to put these things together. But hey, it works for me. Acoustic suppression, thermal anomalies, sensor interference, all related to tree structures. Again, I'm not just talking about the tree structures. I'm talking about, I've talked to people that said they didn't even believe in Bigfoot, but they saw one appear in front of them. This was outside of LA, and it disappeared in some trees. Okay, trees that are too small for a big, broad Bigfoot. So finally, we get to the idea that based on changes in permittivity, and it's these abrupt changes like in these dielectric barriers and layers of material, and we'll get into this in the next slide, that leads to a spectrum of cryptids, okay? So the takeaway message today here is the spectrum of cryptids, from being ordinary creatures, like these typical ordinary creatures that we see in the forest, right? like a chipmunk, all the way to stranger cryptids that seem to us. There's like earthbound cryptids, and then there's variations to all the way to high strangeness, all the way out to creatures seen around orbs and the orbs themselves, based on the effective permittivity. I mean, this is one way to look at it, folks. I'm not saying this definitely defines it, but based on what we've been looking at today, these vortex-like structures and various conditions, including soil structure, minerals, fractal cavities, plasmas, and geomagnetic effects from geomagnetic storms and so forth. This would explain why these are often seen around power plants and so forth. Can affect, no pun intended, the types of cryptids you're going to see in that area. And again, increasingly decoupled structures, as Ken Shoulder said. Okay, I thought this is just sort of an interesting idea. There are these literal field effects in different environments based on permittivity, frequency, and cryptid phenomena. And as a former statistics teacher, the statistical distribution of cryptid sightings, and I would say a lot of different paranormal phenomena, it's not a normal distribution, the Gaussian distribution, that we're used to. And so much of our science is modeled on this normal distribution, which throws out the outliers. But it's really clustered around the mean here. We call that leptokurtotic. Kurtosis being the spread away from the mean of the statistical distribution. And these coherent energy structures are clustered more around the mean with longer tails, which means these are rare events, but they happen more than you expect, even though they're tail black swan events. Black swan events. This is where black swan ghosts comes from in my mind. And so, extraordinary phenomena don't require extraordinary evidence. Extraordinary phenomena are not random miracles. They're rare outcomes of the physics of coherence. Okay? So take that, Michael Shermer. Extraordinary phenomena do not require extraordinary evidence. They're rare outcomes of coherent physics phenomena and all the implications. So one final thought here, and thanks for listening today again, I appreciate it, is the geology of these portal hotspots directly leads to the increased likelihood of coherent energy processes. This is why you get this happening around Skinwalker Ranch, so-called Marley Woods, that was investigated by Ted Phillips, Elbert County, Colorado, Hessdalen, Norway, is you have different types of geological ingredients, including quartz and granite rocks, which are piezoelectric, responding to pressure, which is why you see these earth lights. And if you read Vladimir Bitchkov, again, thank you, Corky, for introducing me to this book, you see these are before earthquakes. Marsha Adams talked about this at SSE, proposing a ball lightning detector to predict earthquakes. Iron-bearing and sulfide minerals, which are conductive, clays and sediment layers like you find in Wiltshire, as Gordon mentioned, which are high permittivity, groundwater, which you also have in Wiltshire, which is conductive, and then fault lines and fractures, which lead to stress and charge separation. Now, another area we can mention here is the San Luis Valley, where the Snippy conference holds, Snippy being that animal mutilation case from '67, which I argue is caused by ball lightning in my presentation there, because of the symptoms you found around Snippy, their prize pony, I believe it was. It was a foal. It wasn't. There was some confusion there. It wasn't Lady, the grown horse. It was a foal, and it was found, kind of carbonized from the neck on up, and there were jellified materials which are associated with coherent matter phenomena. and researchers out there. The one that Dave Paulides investigated, the FBI researcher. His name skips my mind at the moment, but he said when the FBI went out to look at these cattle mutilations in the early 70s, I don't know when they first started, but it was late 60s when this started happening. They sent a team out there. All they ever saw was a flash of light. They had very sensitive cameras set up around these animal mutilations, and they just saw a flash of light, okay, which is consistent with these types of phenomena. So where you have these fractures and fault lines and different sedimentary materials, it's the perfect conditions for charge separation and charge clusters to form. And that, folks, is my argument, which would be testable, of why you get electric field densities higher than ordinary in all these portal hotspots, including Bradshaw Ranch in Sedona, Arizona. Because of these changes, sharp changes in permittivity creates distortions in electric fields, charge separation, and then charge clustering, affecting permittivity, which opens up a gateway for other creatures and other processes to coexist with us in the same space. And this is why you get Bigfoot and cryptids happening around ball lightning and around UFOs, and anytime you get these charge clustering, permittivity, bending type effects. And that's my argument. And you could agree or disagree, but guys, based on whatever, the research I've been able to do so far, this is where you end up with this. Is sharp permittivity transitions generate coherent charge clusters and EVOs and all the stuff that we saw with Ken Shoulders and Matsumoto. I would argue that research directly leads to the findings of OSEP. And all these spooky wooky effects going all the way, in ways I don't completely understand, to haunted sites and ghost sightings, and the sudden cold and the sudden changes, that acoustic shadow effect, what's sometimes called acoustic induction, where sound seemed to disappear. So in any case, I think there is a link. And now I wasn't going to show all of these at Oakridge, but this was kind of the basis of the presentation. So let me go back. So guys, thanks for listening. Thank you very much, Gordon. I appreciate that. Any questions? I thought this was going to go for an hour, and here we are 2 hours into this. I think this completely links up to so much of the research from the excellent research around the planet from the Russian, Soviet, cold fusion, ball lightning researchers. They had their ball lightning conferences, which are still going on Zoom, Bob Greenyer has done a great job doing AI translation, so you can listen to this in kind of Russian accented English, and hear Zadelepin and Anatoly Klimov and all these other brilliant people talking about this. To me, this makes sense. Now, if any of you see a flaw in this, excuse me, I'll talk quieter again. If any of you don't agree, that is fine. This is how my mind has put all these phenomena together after about 30 years of looking into this, is that I agree with Hal and I agree with Gordon here, who's talking about permittivity. This is what explains the strange phenomena. I've seen it in my life. I haven't seen Bigfoot yet, but I'm just talking to witnesses, talking to people seeing things go invisible. I think we can get past the point now where we can doubt these witnesses and ridicule them and say it's paranormal and supernatural. I mean, we can still use those words, but I think there is a non-ordinary scientific explanation, kind of an area of science that hasn't been looked at. Ball lightning has not been looked at very much. People still, even in this day, you read letters in New Scientist, people doubt it exists. They think it's some hallucination or something. That's just ridiculous, guys. And we need to get beyond that. These phenomena that we're looking at today are an extension of Maxwellian electrodynamics, but they're fractal electromagnetics, or as Bob Greenyer calls it, fractal toroidal systems. And this is what leads to the effects that we call supernatural and paranormal. And that's my view of it. And this is why we see it in certain hotspots. It doesn't mean we can completely understand all of this. As I was saying earlier on, and Corky had a response, whether these orbs and ball lightning are conscious. I mean, I'm not asking that ontologically, Corky. I'm actually asking, do they respond to intent? Because people say they do. And there was a great case of this in episode of 1276, which I just heard on Sasquatch Chronicles, of people, a guy saying this ball of light following his car. I mean, there was a cop on the side of the road, and this is Wisconsin, Janesville, Wisconsin. Look it up, and on the map. And I mean, it's following him, and he slowed down because he knew there was one cop that was always on this hill as you went out of town. And the ball, it had to slow down that driver behind me, but it was an orb, and it caught up to him and was speeding. And then not long after, he sees a Bigfoot in the same area. I've spoken to witnesses in Wiltshire, Gordon, that have seen these orbs coming off of Silbury Hill around there, following cars. Paul Weigand, the crop circle researcher who is no longer with us physically, passed on, talked about one following his coming out of the shrub, the hedgerow, right by the cross on the A4 there, by Silbury Hill. And if you look at my interview with Paul and Sonia on my YouTube channel, they saw Paul's car go by and saw the orb come out of the hedgerow and follow his car. Now, Corky, that's my question. And all of you, is there a conscious element to orbs as if they're non-physical entities like you and me, where they can follow you? And it's not just a static gradient. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a type of intelligence. NHI, non-human intelligence. Or not. Guys, this is where I don't know the answer to, and I'm totally open to your ideas. So, thank you very much. Now, I'll go through some of your questions. Any more comments? Thanks a lot. So, let me just go back. Okay, excuse me. Let me minimize this window, and we're going back to, let's see, where is, scenes. Oh, hold on a second. Okay, thank you very much. So let's see. Okay, so thanks for your comments here. So Tim Tara Bakhia says there is a spiritual component. Yeah, there's something about it we don't really understand, and I'm coming at it from a scientific point of view. I can believe there's other types of consciousness. I've been a meditator my whole life, so I think that resonance plays a part of this, and awareness and consciousness. It's something. I'm keeping this to the scientific level, but obviously there's a level to it, and even ball lightning researchers wonder whether there's a continuum to UFOs, whether we're dealing with continuums here of awareness, not discrete processes. And I think my point today has been to show you there is an underlying electromagnetic basis for these phenomena, fractal electromagnetic basis, which leads to electromagnetic phantoms. There's a continuity from Maxwell all the way to paranormal. If you look at fractal Maxwellian electromagnetics, and a connection to geology, and the minerals were around the water flow, and the issues that particles up in charge, all the way to, this is a book that Bob Greene you're talking about recently, from David Moon, about carbon dating and cold fusion, and how maybe we're getting the ages of the Earth are been incorrectly estimated, because if we're dealing with coherent energy processes in the crust, and that's what's generating volcanoes and earthquakes and things like this persistent cold fusion. That's what we're calling it. We know it's not literally cold fusion, but some sort of linear process here in the Earth, creating these heavier elements, which those two Israeli scientists, Goal was one of them, it was in the International Geophysical Journal from Israel. They said that you don't get heavier elements past uranium coming from the solar wind. or from extraterrestrial sources, according to satellites, do not pick up this type of dust in the solar wind. So they have to be generated on Earth. And they argue that cold fusion, which is actually not their original idea, because Matsumoto argued this and so did Shoulders. Maybe they're not familiar with that literature, is that the so-called cold fusion process, people are still calling it cold fusion, is generating new elements in the Earth's crust. There's a transmutational alchemical effect, that alchemy is real. Okay? So, let's see. Yes, any sufficiently explained magic is indistinguishable from science. Well, guys, I believe that. I'm not saying there's a mystical side. It's a big multiverse, okay? Our conscious minds understand a little bit. I'm just saying, after over a century of evidence here, I'm coming down today with the conclusion that the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project point of view on this and Bob Green is correct, and this also explains the subjects I personally had contact with around crop circles, some UFO sightings, the witnesses I've talked to. I think it's the same fractal electromagnetic effect. And prove me wrong. I'm happy to be proved wrong. Come up with a better theory. But I think this explains the evidence. And it comes down to permittivity and permeability and sharp gradients and so forth. So let's go to Gordon's question here. Where does consciousness reside? According to ancients, it's in the realm below the Planck constant, Planck base that drives the world we know. I don't totally know, Gordon, and this comes up a lot because of remote viewing, resonant viewing, something I've been involved with for 30 years now, since 1996. Exactly 30 years. We just had the 30th anniversary. I learned about it in May of 96 at the Far Side. Where is, by consciousness, I think we mean kind of, is it a sense of intention that we're talking about, that we can consciously will ourselves to take action, or this sense of being aware that we're in a larger environment? What is that? It's hard. I don't know exactly consciously. I know I experience it. I don't know. Is it what Edgar Mitchell called the quantum holograph? You know, I was fortunate to hear Edgar Mitchell in Fort Collins at the New Sciences, International Association of New Science meetings. I got to talk to Edgar Mitchell. And he talked, and he's the one who, by the way, inspired the remote viewing program. I think he told Jim Fletcher, the head of NASA at the time, to get involved in RV. I think Edgar Mitchell had a grandmother who had psychic experiences, and they met Russell Targ and the whole thing. We ended up with the remote viewing program, SRI, and so forth, at least that branch of it. And Edgar called it quantum holography, that in every bit of space, the whole is there. So even you sitting in your room, just sitting in front of your desk, you're in contact with the entire multiverse at some level. And it doesn't mean you're conscious of all of it. And so my issue as a remote viewer is that we know that the conscious mind is only aware of a tiny fraction of even what is going into your physical brain every millisecond. It's a tiny fraction of all the information that's going in. And that book by Tor Neurotrenders, The User Illusion, goes into how they figured this out. But it's a fraction of a percent. And so that's the counter argument here, Gordon, which I think about, which is, as a viewer, and Jules has participated in my viewing classes, and some of you who are on the live stream, is that it's you're the challenge of RV is to become conscious of more of what's in your awareness that you're not conscious of. You don't know it's there, and you need a structure to go below the limit to become more aware. So, but yes, it has to do, is there a larger spiritual realm? You know, what I can say here is there is definitely a larger realm of spiritual beings. These people encounter them. I've had my own encounters with loved ones who've passed on, where I've had very vivid interactions in a dream state, which I think RV helped me to contact, which convinces me there's a larger realm of intelligence beyond the physical, and we're just at one frequency. What seems to us being so physical is what you alluded to, Gordon, is the Planck scale. And for us, that's the shortest distance of time in our physical reality, the time it takes speed of a light beam to cross an atom. A very short, very, very short span of time. And that is to us during the span of our lives here on Earth is what seems physical. But it's just a frequency. It's just a frequency too. That's what quantum mechanics tells us is even what's solid. And this is why in the argument flesh and blood, Bigfoot versus the quantum side, there's no dichotomy there. Everything that's physical has a quantum frequency. It's convertible from the frequency simple, the wavelength. I think it's the wavelength divided by energy frequency. Energy, frequency, energy is by related to wavelength. It's sort of a frequency, and our consciousness interprets that as solid. But that is simply our conscious experience of it. To a neutrino, a solar neutrino, not the relic neutrino from Parkhomov, the big ones, but the solar, tiny, fast neutrinos, we're ghosts, guys. You and I are all ghosts to a solar neutrino. It doesn't even see us. It passes through us. We are told that something like orders of billions of solar neutrinos are going through your hand every second. And they're so small, they don't even see your atoms, your atomic structure. They're tiny compared to atomic structure. And it takes them 10 years in lead, solid lead, to hit something. That's how small solar neutrinos are. To you and I, lead seems really heavy and dense. But to a solar neutrino, after 10 years of going through lead, it's going to collide with a lead atom. So it's relative to our perspective that things feel solid or transparent. Are fields ever present, or do they generate themselves? It's a good question. I mean, there is some argument that fields can self-generate, at least electrostatically, that they keep regenerating themselves, and that's how birds are able to keep flying in the sky even when they're not flapping, is that electric field repulsion keeps regenerating itself and generates more as they move along. So fields, I think from an electromagnetic point of view, it would seem to me, and I'm not a physicist, guys, I'm a former statistician, sociologist, it would seem to me that fields, at least electromagnetically, do regenerate, and that would be how we could tap into excess heat and so forth. Because it keeps regenerating and creates a kind of cascading effect. The snowball rolling down the hill, getting bigger, right? It may be that that's all around us. I think it's likely in nature right now, and that's how some of the creatures, ordinary creatures around, are able to do what they do. If you ever looked at hummingbirds, is they're able to keep regenerating some sort of field effect around them that creates a kind of a electrostatic levitation. So, good question. Let me just go back. Anyway, guys, these are just my ideas, and I'm not saying these are necessarily the only way to look at it, but and coherent matter is not my original idea, but I'm getting this from all the other people that have studied this before me, and it's just a way to make sense of this. I think if one thing you can take away from it, and thanks, we went on for about 2.5 hours, so it was a good long talk here. When you hear people just talking about orbs and those sorts of phenomena, what I wanted to show you today is there is an electromagnetic, a non-ordinary electromagnetic basis for this called coherent matter, and it generates in certain process, in certain environments, especially where you get sharp permittivity gradients, layers of material. It's not just in UFO, NHI metamaterials from crash sites and so forth, if that's what those are, wherever those are from. You talk to people involved in these crash retrievals, and you hear that the isotopic proportions are not from what you find on Earth. It's from another part of the Milky Way. So it suggests an extraterrestrial source. But even the types of transitions you get in rock layers in the geology around us can inherently create these charge clusters, which is why you talk to people who've been camping. They said they saw orbs over streams and things. I've heard about particular locations where this happens. Or you get like Brown's Mountain lights in North Carolina. In places, the spook lights, as sometimes they call them. There's a place, Marfa, Texas, right? Spook lights. There's actually a lesser known scientific basis for why these occur, but it doesn't end there. There's a continuum over to creatures and awareness and consciousness, like Gordon is suggesting to us, and others. And it's where I don't totally know the answers. There seems to be a transition to intelligence. It just seems to me what the evidence points to. I don't totally understand how that works, but it seems to suggest that, which is why there seems to be an intelligent interaction between humans and orbs and creatures and Bigfoot and orbs. But I'm just trying to establish today that there's a continuum of phenomena here. If you want to call it paranormal and supernatural, you could, but I think it's normal and natural. It's just outside the boundaries of our typical awareness as a society because of our value system and the organizations we've grown up around and authority figures and governments who have pushed these phenomena back and labeled them in a certain way. That's my point of view on it, and you're welcome to disagree with that if it doesn't work for you. So as George is saying, paranormal is just normal once we understand it. Yeah. Like Wi-Fi is intangible. But it's all right. Now, Maxwell and Faraday at the time in the 1800s in the UK were thought of as airy-fairy metaphysicians. That's what people called them. Airy-fairy metaphysicians. Because you can't see electromagnetic fields, can you? And wavelengths. And they were really distraught. In their writings, they talk about this sort of negativity they encountered from people. So if you've encountered negativity, guys, this is par for the course if you want to be different and do something new and discover something different than what we already believe in and go into the future and be on the cutting edge. You're going to encounter this negativity from the mainstream. It's just par for the course. It's not particular to this subject matter because Maxwell and Faraday wrote about this, and so did Maxwell, because the Newtonians at the time said hogwash. However, Maxwell's equations led to the prediction of radio waves. Apparently, through integral calculus, predicted radio waves, which are discovered first by David Hughes, who didn't realize it at the time, a British UK experimenter, musician, who detected this, and people said that's just magnetic induction. So 10 years later, Hertz discovers and gives given credit for radio waves. But it's predicted, and that's how you know that science has value, is it can predict things that don't exist yet. And it always seems like paranormal and supernatural. So that's a very good comment, George. I completely agree to that. Yes. So electric universe theory, I think we've underestimated the impact of electrical forces in our reality. Guys, again, I'm just coming out of this from my experience around crop circles. On other lectures, and you can go back on my YouTube channel, I have shown cases where the crop circle, battery failure, camera failure, strange. Peter Sorensen described these strange rubbery lights over one of them. It looked like the light beams were like bending like rubber bands or something. Very strange. But some of what we talked about today would explain this. And some of the weird effects around UFOs. I'm not completely explaining where they come from, who they are. It's another discussion, but they seem to have some of these space-time bending effects simply from the physics of how they are moving around. And if you want to say that's speculative or take the AI response that there's no evidence, I think there's evidence. So Corky's saying the nature of nature leads to plasmas. Yeah, and it leads to coherent structures and UFOs. And perhaps once we learn how to tap into this a little more, we'll be able to get our own energy from this instead of just talking about it. So, and thanks for putting up with my voice today. Yeah, smoke doesn't help, but it seems to have gotten a little better over the past hour. I don't know. Does anyone know why the Nile hasn't shown progress towards carving its own Grand Canyon? Definitely in the U.S., you have a lot of areas where there were floods or big rivers for long periods of time. So I'm not sure why you wouldn't get that in the Nile. Is it maybe it fills in again with sand? Who knows? It's a good question. Oh, thanks. Yes. So we have. If you're interested in reading more, you can read about Gary, all my UFO witnesses. A lot of great stories in here from NASA and people who pilots and stuff of their flights. Of course, Black Swan Ghost, the most recent one. Excuse me, Dark Matter Monsters. I talk about this electromagnetic ideas in the book, and of course, the original, the one that kicked it all off, Opening Minds, about these weird effects around crop circles and RV, and of course, a perennial favorite, Planetary Intelligence, about, getting in synchrony with planetary frequencies instead of just technological ones. So, anything else? Yeah, Corky, about primitivity. I heard about. I didn't know much about this before Hal's presentation in 2018. You got to keep researching it till it totally makes sense. There's different ways of describing it, and even once you totally understand it, people question, some of Maxwell's ideas and so forth. But it's his word. But that's the basic idea: is susceptibility to an external field, or the ability of a material to resist an external field, something like that. And it's just some materials are transparent to other fields, and some create charge separation. And the ones that go in the direction of the transparency also have more coherency because the charge is no longer separated. Yeah. So, and so George is making a good point here. Small electrostatic charges are seemingly insignificant to us on our scale, but tiny creatures can feel them, are affected by charged objects. And bees probably feel charged. Yeah. So that is a point. I think Pollock talks about this. There are tiny hairs on some of these insects, and they can feel charge and sense it. And again, this is the point that little tiny phenomena can have big effects. It goes back to chaos theory, which is kind of my introduction to this a long time ago. So this is little changes can have big effects if there's a lot of it going on. Even a little change can have a big effect. But in the case of charge, you can't see it, but it's all around us, electrostatic charge. And these animals can use it to sense things. Definitely insects have very subtle electrostatic sensors. So it's something like the greatest power requires the lightest touch sort of idea. Is electric charge is so omnipresent in our reality. But I think that's really the secret to Bigfoot, in my view, because there's so many. It's not the only secret. It's one of the secrets, is they can modulate and manipulate electrical charge. And as I was saying, I didn't finish edging. I think all those fine hairs they have can lead to a type of electrostatic buildup as they're walking across wherever they are. And probably in such a large way that they become like a little Van der Graaf generator or something. Because people report that their hair standing on end around Bigfoot. I mean, this is real evidence. You could say, oh, it's just a story. It's not data. But when you hear it from enough people, it's evidence. And people report their hair standing on end around Bigfoot, which means there's some electromagnetic activity going on. And I think that they are masters of electromagnetism, natural electromagnetism, pre 60 hertz cycle electromagnetism. And all those millions of tiny hairs on their body, each can add a little charge and tribal. Maybe they're moving around. There's also piezoelectric effect in bones. There's multiple ways that they could be generating this sort of energy density. But once you have that energy density, you can generate orbs. You should be able to generate orbs. If you and I knew how to do it, we'd be able to make our own. And this gets back into some of the comments that Jules was making before about the jinn and so forth, and ideas like that. So Gordon says in the past, don't forget the humble bumblebee. Right. And that's just what I was reading in Charged yesterday, Gordon, is in Pollock's book, is that there was someone that showed that a bumblebee shouldn't be able to fly, I think back in the 1920s and 30s. But Pollock makes the argument that the flapping creates electrostatic charge, which creates charge repulsion and their ability to navigate by generating charge. Very interesting idea. And they have all those really fine hairs on their bodies, which would sort of aid in that. So they're already these sort of very advanced creatures technologically, which you can fine tune their charge and fly that way. And maybe the wings do something, but that's not all of it allows them to stay in the air, just like the spider ballooning effects, right? I mean, if spiders could do it, in general, scientific principles apply across all of reality, or at least large chunks of it. If we've been able to ascertain that spiders can levitate, literally levitate, it should ultimately imply that humans can levitate. Even if you and I don't know how to do it, it means technically it should be possible, right? And of course, other insects, that would be reasonable, and maybe other mammals. And as I've mentioned before, I have seen examples of levitation in Japan of small objects, from the magic guy that could, melt glass in his hands and levitate yen notes, and levitated a cigarette into my shirt pocket from about 15 feet away across the room. That could be someone who's mastered, it could be another effect too. That could be someone who's mastered radiant energy in some way, that they're generating a type of radiant energy, as Tesla called it, and they're able to control it. Just like people who've been meditating a long time, monks and so forth, seem to have these superhuman abilities to, generate a lot of heat or even levitate. And there is that, and I'll end on this, guys. Someone mentioned this at the Senate UFO hearing. They had this person from Yale, I forget his name, a professor from Yale, talk about human levitation, just as a precursor to the idea that UFO supernatural abilities is already something we've seen in human abilities, which is why he argued the Catholic Church can accept extraterrestrials from human examples of saints levitating. And I forget his name, but he wrote a book called They Flew. They Flew, and it's about human accounts of levitation. And he, in this talk he gave in the Senate room, he argued right there that humans can levitate. There's so many accounts of it in religious texts throughout the centuries that it's probably real. Now, I haven't seen this myself, but there is Viktor Grebennikov levitating with his beetle wing scaffold structure. And he described some of these primitivity transitioning effects too. I mean, he said that people that would see him flying described it as a round disc. Is that a kind of a primitivity effect? I don't know. He even, you read Gromenikov's work, he describes how changing the angle of the beetle wing blinds that he made, it's very fascinating. So there is precedent for this, and I think we can see that there's evidence. Okay. Oh, great, Jules. Ticks use this to attack. They're using electrostatic charge. Is that what it is, like gecko feet? No wonder. Okay, I'm just looking back here. Yes. Your heart is not a pump. That is true. There is a huge electromagnetic component to it. And I guess we could sum it up this way, folks. Mechanistic science hasn't completely appreciated the magnitude of the electromagnetic continuum on our lives and our reality because it's invisible, like electromagnetic fields, Maxwell, and it's so tiny little charges. You see it when it aggregates into a ball lightning or something like that momentarily, but it's more part of an invisible universe around us, and it leads off into these invisible phenomena. So this is not a mechanistic reductional explanation for me, but I'm just saying we've ignored these phenomena because we're biased towards mechanistic, measurable, normal distribution processes. We're not oriented towards rare events. We're taught to throw out the outliers from our statistical training from these guys. These were guys that invented statistics 100 years ago. It's a bias we all have as modern people. And then we label these types of phenomena and the people that study it as, like pathological science, and other derogatory names when it doesn't deserve it, just because we're so biased towards exactly mainstream processes here. And it's not good science to do that. You're throwing away data. And my training as a sociologist is you do not discount witness testimony simply because it doesn't fit with your belief structure. If we had that happen, we never would have discovered meteorites. Remember, those were considered to be mythological too, meteorites. The French Academy of Sciences considered meteorites to be a hoax because it wasn't part of their Aristotelian mindset that anything could come from the sky. And it was called peasant folklore. But a lot of what's considered to be peasant folklore never gets picked up by mainstream science because it's a type of bias. And those people won't do it until they have to, until their grant structure depends on it and their promotional structure. Now, going back to the very beginning of our talk today, just to sum it up, if you go to conferences like Bigfoot conferences, you will actually encounter witnesses, very sincere people that don't want any fame or fortune out of this, just want to tell you their experience. You will see that there's a big gap between mainstream science and what people are experiencing. Now, people like James Lukatsky attempted to bridge that a little bit between their experience at Skinwalker Ranch, which has a sort of a more extreme level of these events and types of life forms, the dogmen and such, and then taking it back home to Maryland, the so-called hitchhiker effect. But Lukatsky couldn't get any traction in Washington, he said, from other agencies because they were worried about being considered weird. So ultimately, folks, this has to do with, I guess, what Gordon here is calling a conformational bias. It's a sociological issue. It's our fear of being ridiculed and ostracized that we have as mammals from the tribe and from the clan, of going against social norms and going against normalcy. And we've been so conditioned by it for so long, and so have all these governmental bureaucratic structures we've grown up with, that people are not taking risks anymore. What we've been talking about today here is science. It's a newer type of science, but it's based on science. It's based on what we accept to be basic, constants of nature, and show how they can become variables. And when they do become variables, you get these kind of weird, supernatural, paranormal effects, which go off into experiences which I can't completely explain. Nobody can. But it doesn't mean that they're not real, just because they don't totally fit in this Newtonian Cartesian mindset. Because they're, as I showed you, statistically, they're a little more rare. And they're based on fractal patterns, not linear patterns. Our mindset in the Western world is very linear, but we know that nature really is based on fractals, fractal structures. So, in any case. Okay, well, guys, thanks very much. It went a little over an hour. But thanks again for listening. Feel free to put comments in the box below. And if you're listening to this later, just put your comments in. Agree, disagree. I'm more interested in the discussion around this and the debate than me personally being right. But I think I'm probably right about the things I said today. But if you have another point of view, if there's a simpler explanation, better explanation for all of this data, I don't think the idea that saying these are just hoaxes or people, who are delusional, or all those traditional ice crystals. And I don't think the swamp gas explanations hold it for these phenomena, guys. Weather balloons. I don't think it's. I'm just saying. I don't think it's weather balloons. Okay, that's how I'm going to come down here today. It's not weather balloons. But if you have another point of view, I'm always interested in hearing it, and that's how we make progress here and open this up and include more people and their experiences into our understanding, rather than pushing it away and silencing important witness testimony that we should be hearing from to understand what sort of reality we're in. What are these phenomena that we're encountering, which it seems to me is just growing over time, especially congressional testimony, podcast, internet. We're hearing more about this. So I think we want to get a handle on it, and that's my view. So thanks a lot, folks. Thanks for watching. Thanks very much for this. I appreciate that. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. And Corks, one more thing, says is a book about floating. Well, the book is called They Flew, and it's about people. It's about real cases of, I believe, religious figures levitating throughout history, going back to ancient times, Middle Ages, and the author here argues this should be taken seriously. Now, I'll say one more thing. In my tradition, as someone who does TM, I've been doing transcendental meditation for a half a century now. Yeah, kind of dates me a little bit. I learned it in the 1970s. There is the city program, and they have a thing of levitating. I haven't seen it, and I can't ascertain whether it's true. It is, even in the TM program, there's these mentions of it. I haven't seen it myself, so I can't really comment. It's just something that's part of the tradition. So one more thing to mention. I'm going to have some RV classes, Zoom classes coming. If you're interested, just go to learnrv.com and you can find a link to find out more about that if you want to do some training in this. I've started to see a lot of these effects from RV. You remember when Uri Geller was being tested at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory before Ingo Swann? They had weird, spooky, wooky, skinwalker type effects at Lawrence Livermore Lab. The researchers there saw little UFOs floating around the room, and then cryptids and little big creatures on their beds and things. Only while Uri was around, aports showed up of things that Hal Puthoff had been missing, lapel pins. You can even see it there, and it's happening in a lab environment. Again, it shows us that this is a real scientific effect. We can be looking at it and wondering, how does that relate to RV, which is allegedly what Uri was asked to come over and demonstrate. And you can see that in the movie Third Eye Spies by Lance Mungia, especially in the excerpts at the end, the shorts at the end, the extras of him doing the RV right there with, objects that were just hiding in boxes and things. But I mean, it's a continuum of phenomena. That's what I've been basically presenting to. That's my idea about it. So anyway, thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. It's great having you here. And we will see you in the next episode. So take care for now. And we'll go out again on... we will go out. Let's see if we can find it again.